The PlayStation 1 is one of those consoles that outputs RGB by default, which is awesome for using something like an OSSC or another upscaler to get really sharp picture on a modern television. All you would need is an RGB SCART cable and an upscaler, and you'd have yourself some really good picture out of your PlayStation 1. But it's 2021, and I think we could do a lot better than that. Last year, in 2020, Dan Kunz released the PS1Digital, an HDMI mod for the PlayStation 1 that grabs all of the signal from the PlayStation 1 and outputs to HDMI. It has a built-in upscaler which will allow you to output up to 960p from that HDMI port. But I think the number one feature for the PS1Digital is its almost instant resolution switching, which is something that the OSSC just can't do. You can switch between resolutions depending on the game type that you're playing, or maybe in the menu, without dropping any frames, which is awesome for someone who's streaming. I'm going to be doing mine in a 5501 PlayStation, which is actually the same model that you could do an X Station too. With that being said, let's jump on board the HDMI hype train, jump over to the bench, and I'll show you how to do it. I've got the PS1Digital installation instructions pulled up on my phone. First things first, let's open up this console. First things first, let's just put this motherboard aside and we'll focus on this little shield here. If you flip the shield over and take a look at this part right here, we're gonna have to cut this little nub part off with our side cutters. And on that same side, but just a little further down, we're gonna have to flatten out this little tab right here. I'm gonna use my little wire stripper plier thingies. Kind of a hard area to reach because of this little bit right here. Okay, I think I got it pretty flat down. Now go ahead and put the shield aside. All right, let's bring our motherboard back in. Let's just take this copper piece off here, which is kind of sad because I kind of like it. And now we're gonna remove this shield right here. If you look all the way around it, there's these little tab points. They kind of go all the way around here. We're gonna take some solder braid and we're going to suck up all the solder around all those points. I recommend you using flux to help the solder wick into the wick. I'm gonna start over here. It's going a little slow. I'm gonna turn my iron up. While you're going around, you can kind of put the iron on the legs and try to peel them up off the board here. Sort of like that. Okay, then the last big one is in here. Could probably get away with just heating this one up and pulling this off because all the other ones should be loose. Just like that. I'm just gonna go around and clean up all of these pads that we just desoldered. Just be careful not to get solder on all these components to the side. That's pretty good. Now I'm gonna go just clean up all those pads with some isopropyl alcohol. All right, next we're gonna remove this serial port right here in the middle. So flip the board over and you can see all of the pins here. I'm gonna take my desoldering gun and desolder the pins in the middle here, and then we'll go back and we'll worry about the other larger pins on the side here afterwards. All right, that looks pretty good. I'm just gonna go through each one of these with a tweezer and kind of make sure that they're disconnected. kind of push on a little bit. That's pretty good. Next, let's use the solder braid on these other points here. I'm just gonna add some more flux. Then we can desolder these pins. Okay, now we should be able to kind of gently work on these pins. And sort of pull down on the socket. Be very gentle with this. You just want to take your time. And then it can just kind of fall out. All right, afterwards you can flip the board back over. Next, we have to remove a surface mount component, and since this is a PU18 motherboard, there's only one place that we have to remove something. If you look right here at the Sony chip, there's a really small capacitor right there that we have to remove. So let's add solder to both sides. And then just carefully go back and forth between both sides and lift the piece off. Now that that's done, we're gonna work on doing the flex cables. And since we're already at the GPU, let's go ahead and do the hardest part of the whole installation, and that's this GPU flex cable. If I turn the board to the side and you can kind of look down here, the pins on the GPU sort of dangle over the edge of the chip onto the board. These pins are very fragile, they'll easily move. And not only that, they'll easily move backwards into the GPU if you're not careful. But that's okay, we'll use some super secret Voltar techniques to get this flex cable installed here. The flex cable should sort of line up with the front edge of the pins. If you look into there, I know it's hard to see here, but if you look at the pins on your PlayStation, you'll see that they kind of meet the pads on the board. That's right where this flex cable is going to meet up. The strategy is going to be solder one side of the flex cable, then solder the other side, and then do a little bit of drag soldering to do the middle part here. But we're going to rely heavily on two things. One, we're going to use a lot of flux here. And two, we're going to not use a lot of solder. It does not take a lot of solder to solder this flex cable to the GPU. I'm also going to be using this bent tip too, which is going to be better for drag soldering compared to the chisel tip. You really want to get one of these. First things first, let's get some flux in here. You really want quite a bit. And now we're just gonna get the tiniest amount of solder on the soldering iron. Get that flex cable in position. There's a bare pad at the very bottom left edge of the chip right here. That's gonna line up with the first trace on the flex cable. So keep in mind, you're not gonna line it all the way up over here. It needs to line up with this pad over here. And there's actually another one around the corner here. That's why this little piece is here. But focus on this part at first. Once you have it pretty well lined up, do your best to keep the flex pressed against the pins, but not too hard, and then try to get a little bit of solder on there. Okay, now that this side is anchored down, we're gonna anchor down the right side as well. Same thing, grab a tiny bit of solder. You should probably add some more flux as well. Go ahead and line the cable up and get your solder on that right side. You're basically just gonna keep doing the same thing in the middle here, using more flux, adding a little bit of solder, and get a nice even connection across all of the wires of this flex cable. If you find that you still can't get rid of a little spot, like I have a tiny spot that you can probably barely see, you can use a clean piece of solder braid to, and very carefully, soak up just that one little spot. I think that's a pretty good job. Now we're not going to forget about this little guy around the corner here. Let's get him tacked down. Okay, I think that's all set. I think what I'm gonna do now that the difficult part is done, I'm gonna just clean off this flux a little bit. All right, that's the hardest part of the whole install. Now we just gotta do some more flex cables. The next one we should do is this controller flex cable over here. It's kind of an awkward cable, but you'll have to make it work. Gonna go in there kind of something like that. Probably recommend starting on this side here. First thing, let's get some flux in there. I would get a little bit of solder on your soldering iron. Once you've lined it up, go ahead and solder one. And you can go through and solder these other ones. You might need to kind of push the flex cable down a little bit so that it lines up more evenly. Then you can turn it around, finish on the other side. There's the controller cable. Next, we'll do this serial port wiring up here. Goes something like that. We'll do the same thing. We'll take a little bit of solder first, try to get all the holes lined up, and then tack it down. If everything is still lined up, you can solder the rest. Then let's just take a look at the bottom side. Yeah, things are looking pretty good there. We've got good connections. Last but not least is the audio cable, and that's this chip right here. This should be a little bit easier than the GPU, but same relative technique. Get the flex cable in there, tack it down on one side and the other side, and then kind of smooth it out all the way down. All right, something like that. Next, we're gonna work on putting everything back together and doing some testing. I'm gonna go ahead and put the X Station ribbon cable back. Go ahead and put it into the case. Now we're gonna find this little 3D printed piece that was in the bag. We're gonna take out these two round spacer things. These two little pieces are gonna go up here on top of the serial, where the serial port was. Then we're gonna put the PS1Digital in and temporarily secure it with some screws. Looks like we lost a little thermal pad thingy in the bag. Just gonna squish that guy back on. Make sure you don't get your audio flex cable stuck underneath it. We're gonna go ahead and test the PS1Digital to make sure 3.3 volts, which is this hole right here, isn't shorting to ground here. And that's good. And then 5 volts is over here. And again, same thing, make sure 5 volts is not shorted to ground. And that's good too. Now we're gonna hook up all of our wires. Guess we'll start with this controller port here. These kind of lift up, cable goes in, and then those things close on top of it. The GPU cable here has a little sticky pad, but I'm not gonna do that yet until we get this thing tested. The next step is to test HDMI. So we're gonna plug the power in and see what kind of video signal we get out of here. All right, I booted it up off camera. Everything was fine. The only thing I had to do was initially I was getting a black screen, but it's because I have an X station and it wasn't connected to this ribbon cable for the X station. So I had to temporarily put the X station connected to this ribbon cable, and then the PlayStation booted up on my monitor to the memory card screen, which is expected at this point. We're gonna finish a couple of things up on the board here, and then we're gonna put the top shield on. You might have a piece of plastic on your sticky pad. I didn't, so I'm not gonna remove it, but you might have to remove yours. If you look at the ribbon cable for the GPU here, there's this little sticker. Go ahead and take that sticker off, and then we're gonna flatten the flex cable down a little bit. So we're just gonna put a crease here and stick the flex cable, well, kind of, to this thing here. Next, we're gonna install the Wi-Fi antenna. It's gonna go on this little spot right here. You probably wanna have some kind of support on this. So like hold on to the mod while you press this down, because it takes a little bit of force to get that in. We're gonna put some screws back on the board before we put this top shield on. Okay, I think that's everything. I'm gonna go ahead and unplug the controller ports and the power supply. I gotta be very careful because there's a lot of things I gotta thread through the shield. So the X station is gonna go in there. The Wi-Fi antenna is gonna go through this hole on the right side here, this kind of big rectangle. Okay, just make sure everything's seated correctly. All right, let's stick the antenna down. The antenna is gonna go somewhere right about here. Just like that. I'm gonna put everything else back together and do some final testing. Just one more note, when you're putting the case back together, this 3D printed piece is gonna go here on the HDMI port, and it's gonna get sandwiched between the top and the bottom of the case. Just like that. I didn't run into any problems with my install other than that initial not having my X station plugged in, but after I got that squared away, I was able to have HDMI output, had my X station working, and I was able to play some games. If you do end up having any problems with the video or the audio, there's a troubleshooting guide in the installation that you can look at to see if you can troubleshoot what's going on. The first thing I did was open up the OSD, which is L2, R2, square, X, and start. Opens up this menu and you can choose the output resolution. So I went ahead and changed the output resolution to 1080p to match my monitor. One of the coolest parts about the PS1Digital is that you can update the firmware over Wi-Fi. And to do that, you're gonna have to go to Wi-Fi setup here, put in your SSID and password, and then you're just connected to Wi-Fi. Then after you've got your Wi-Fi set up, you can go to firmware upgrade right here. You could do things like check if the firmware needs to be updated, download it, flash it, and restart the console all through this OSD. Another cool thing you could do is actually reset the PlayStation from here. So if you're in the OSD, you can hit square to reset. In my case, I have an X station. I can just hit triangle here and I can reset the console, go back to the X station menu. Leave a like on this video and get subscribed if this video helped you out. And check out this other video about how to do the X station in a PS1. I'll see you in the next video.